Kennesaw Mountain, June 28, 1864. Through the gunpowder haze, a Union soldier crouched behind an oak, his rifle singing a metallic song of lever and cartridge. 15 shots. In the time it took his comrades to reload just once, he unleashed a storm of lead. This was not the war as anyone knew it. This was something else entirely. In a conflict defined by brutal attrition and outdated tactics, one invention held the power to shatter the stalemate, to rewrite the rules of engagement. Yet this revolutionary weapon was quietly, deliberately, pushed to the margins, its potential suppressed not by enemy action, but by the very officers it was designed to serve. Why? And what did they truly fear? Before we dive into this forgotten chapter of history, tell us in the comments below, where are you watching us from today? From Hidden Files, this is the story of the Forbidden Weapon, the repeating rifle that threatened to change the American Civil War. The sweltering Georgia morning of June 28, 1864, was not merely hot. It was a humid, suffocating blanket that pressed down on the landscape, making every breath a chore. The air, thick with the smell of pine resin and damp earth, was soon to be choked with the acrid stench of black powder. In the dense, unforgiving woods surrounding Kennesaw Mountain, Union Private James Wilson, barely 25 years of age, found himself once again in the crucible of combat. His blue wool uniform, already caked with the red clay of Georgia and darkened by sweat, clung uncomfortably to his frame. He was pressed low, seeking what meager cover a gnarled fallen oak offered, its bark scarred by previous engagements. A discordant symphony of war swelled around him, the distant percussive thud of cannon fire, the sharper, closer crackle of rifle shots, and the terrifying, incessant hum of Minié balls slicing through the air, sounding like angry bees just inches from his ears. Through the intermittent gaps in the smoke, Wilson observed the inexorable advance of Confederate skirmishers. Their gray uniforms, blending with the muted greens and browns of the forest, appeared and disappeared like specters, now less than 50 yards from his position. The momentum of their charge, fueled by desperation and discipline, seemed unstoppable. Around Wilson, the grim tableau of Civil War infantry combat unfolded with agonizing predictability. His comrades, men hardened by years of brutal fighting, wrestled with the archaic demands of their standard-issue Springfield Model 1861 muskets. Each soldier was locked in a solitary, frantic struggle against time and the enemy's fire. The ritual was etched into their muscle memory. Tear the paper cartridge with teeth, spilling loose black powder into the pan and down the barrel. Ram the conical lead ball, often lubricated with beeswax and tallow. Down the bore with a slender, clanging ramrod. Then, with trembling fingers, affix a percussion cap to the nipple. Every step in this 20-second sequence was a moment of profound vulnerability, exposing the soldier to the constant threat of a fatal shot. Their faces, grim and contorted with effort, reflected the desperate odds. But Wilson's movements were different. There was a practiced, almost serene efficiency to his actions, a stark contrast to the frantic scramble surrounding him. His fingers, calloused but nimble, found the distinctive brass lever beneath the receiver of his Henry rifle. With a swift, fluid motion, born of countless hours of drilling and the brutal lessons of the battlefield, the lever dropped down and then snapped back up. The metallic snick was almost lost in the cacophony, a fleeting sound that nevertheless marked a paradigm shift. A spent, .44 caliber rimfire casing, its brass still warm, spiraled elegantly into the tangled undergrowth, and a fresh cartridge, gleaming dully, clicked into the breech. Wilson did not break his aim. His left eye remained steadfastly fixed down the iron sights, scanning for targets, while his right thumb effortlessly drew back the hammer. Crack. 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 The Henry sang. It was a rapid, almost furious staccato, a fundamentally different sound from the slower, more deliberate reports of the muzzle loaders. 15 shots, 15 precise, devastating projectiles launched in less than 12 seconds, each one finding its mark, tearing into the advancing rebel line. Where a single Union soldier typically fired, waited, reloaded, and then fired again, Wilson laid down a continuous, lethal torrent of fire. The Confederate advance, met with an inexplicable and unprecedented volume of lead, faltered. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Their charge, which moments before had seemed so resolute, broke. They recoiled in disarray, leaving a scattering of dead and wounded among the pines and thickets, bewildered by the sheer, unyielding firepower emanating from what appeared to be a solitary position. Wilson's weapon, effectively performing the work of 10 men, was more than just a rifle. It was a potent symbol, embodying a terrifying promise. The ability to dramatically alter the odds, to save precious lives, to shorten the agonizing duration of the war. Yet, even as its lethal efficiency was undeniable on that bloody Georgia slope, the Henry rifle was already regarded with profound suspicion, its revolutionary potential perceived not as a strategic asset, but as a dangerous threat, not to the enemy, but to the very military establishment it was designed to defend. The genesis of this paradigm-shifting weapon lay years earlier, far from the brutal, smoke-choked fields of the Confederacy, in the industrious workshops of the New Haven Arms Company in Connecticut. The year was 1860, a time of mounting political tension and nascent technological revolution in America. Benjamin Tyler Henry, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a meticulous mechanical genius and an unwavering determination, had, after years of dedicated work, brought to fruition a concept that would fundamentally redefine personal firearms. Born in 1818, Henry had spent much of his adult life immersed in the burgeoning American arms industry, driven by an engineering vision that sought to transcend the inherent limitations of single-shot weaponry, moving beyond mere improvement to outright transformation. On October 16, 1860, his diligent efforts culminated in the issuance of U.S. Patent No. 30-446 for his groundbreaking design, the Henry repeating rifle. The Henry was, by the standards of its era, a marvel of mechanical ingenuity. Its most striking feature was its distinctive brass receiver, a gleaming, robust housing that gave the rifle an almost regal appearance, while also serving a critical structural function. Within this elegant frame lay the core of its revolutionary capability, a tubular magazine positioned directly beneath the barrel. This elongated tube, spring-loaded, was capable of holding an astonishing 16 rounds of .44 caliber rimfire ammunition. This capacity stood in stark contrast to other nascent repeating arms, such as the Spencer repeating rifle, which had been patented earlier in 1860 by Christopher Spencer, a younger but equally innovative inventor. While Spencer's design, which held 7 rounds in a tubular magazine inserted into the buttstock, represented a significant leap forward in firepower, Henry's rifle offered nearly double the ammunition capacity and featured a smoother, faster operating mechanism. The true genius of the Henry rifle resided in its integrated lever action system. The act of reloading and recocking was consolidated into a single, fluid motion. To operate, the soldier would lower the distinctive large finger lever loop, which simultaneously dropped the breech block, extracted and ejected the spent metallic cartridge, and cocked the hammer. As the lever was then cycled back up, a fresh cartridge was lifted from the spring-driven tubular magazine and fed directly into the chamber. The metallic cartridge itself was a critical innovation. Unlike the fragile, often unreliable paper cartridges of muzzle-loading firearms, which required soldiers to carry separate powder, ball, and percussion caps, Henry's self-contained brass casing offered reliable ignition, consistent ballistic performance, and crucial protection from the elements. This eliminated the vulnerability of exposed powder and the potential for misfires in damp conditions, a constant concern for soldiers armed with traditional muskets. The loading process for the Henry magazine involved lowering a follower rod at the front of the magazine tube, inserting cartridges one by one, and then securing the follower rod back in place, a method still faster and more secure than handling loose components under fire. When the American Civil War erupted in April 1861, plunging the nation into an unprecedented conflict, the arsenals of both the Union and the Confederacy were predominantly stocked with muzzle-loading rifled muskets. These weapons, epitomized by the Union's standard-issue Springfield Model 1861, represented a technology that had seen little fundamental change since the Napoleonic Wars of half a century prior. The Springfield, though a robust and accurate weapon capable of engaging targets effectively at ranges up to 400 yards, demanded the aforementioned laborious multi-step reload process. Under ideal training and conditions, a skilled soldier might manage 3 to 4 shots per minute. The Henry rifle, by contrast, could deliver a devastating 15 to 20 shots per minute, effectively transforming the individual soldier into a mobile, devastating fire platform, a force multiplier unlike any seen before. This immense technological disparity was further complicated by stark economic realities. A single Henry rifle retailed for an astronomical $42. To an enlisted Union soldier earning $13 a month, this represented more than 3 months' wages, a princely sum that made personal acquisition a significant sacrifice or a rare luxury. The government, by comparison, acquired a standard Springfield Model 1861 for approximately $20 per unit, less than half the cost of a Henry. This significant cost difference was not merely an accounting detail, it was the first, and perhaps most immediate layer of a complex equation. This economic barrier, coupled with the profound military, logistical, and even philosophical challenges that such a revolutionary weapon would present, began to hint at the deep-seated resistance it would face from an army steeped in centuries of conventional doctrine. The stage was thus set, not just for a war of muskets and cannon, but for an internal conflict over the very future of warfare itself within the Union military hierarchy. The revolutionary Henry rifle, a weapon of undeniable tactical superiority, did not find its way into the hands of Union soldiers through systematic government issue. Instead, its initial presence on the battlefields, beginning in limited numbers during 1862, was a testament to individual initiative and a profound belief in its transformative power. The United States Department of War, bound by bureaucratic inertia and conservative doctrine, made no mass purchases of the Henry. Consequently, these rifles entered service primarily through 2 unofficial channels: individual soldiers and officers, often men of means, who spent their own meager wages or substantial personal savings to acquire them, and through patriotic donations from families or sympathetic community groups back home, who recognized the potential advantage these firearms offered their fighting kin. Each Henry rifle arriving at the front lines represented a personal investment, a gamble on a technology yet to be fully endorsed by the military establishment. Among the early adopters, cavalry units quickly recognized the profound tactical advantage offered by repeating rifles. The ability to unleash a volley of shots without breaking stride or dismounting fundamentally altered their combat effectiveness. Mounted charges, skirmishes, and rapid defensive actions were transformed by the sustained firepower that Henry rifles provided. A trooper armed with a traditional carbine, typically a single-shot muzzleloader or an early breechloader, was limited by slow reloads. A Henry-equipped cavalryman, however, could maintain continuous fire, turning what might have been a fleeting engagement into a devastating display of concentrated firepower. This capability was particularly crucial in the fluid, fast-moving engagements characteristic of cavalry operations, where a sudden surge of fire could decide the outcome. One of the most compelling early demonstrations of the Henry rifle's impact came in 1863, with the 7th Regiment of Illinois Volunteer Infantry, under the command of Colonel John MacArthur. A seasoned officer, MacArthur, then 37 years old, harbored a keen eye for tactical innovation. Operating in the rugged terrain of Tennessee, his regiment began to acquire Henry rifles in significant numbers, often through the pooled resources of the soldiers themselves or through direct appeals to their home communities for support. MacArthur understood that even a partial equipping of his men with these advanced weapons could yield disproportionate results. The true test of their efficacy came during the relentless Confederate attempts to ambush Union supply convoys moving along the vital Cumberland River. These were often brutal, close-quarters affairs, where rebel guerrillas and regular cavalry units would strike from concealed positions, aiming to disrupt logistics and seize precious provisions. In these engagements, the handful of Henry-armed skirmishers within MacArthur's regiment proved to be indispensable. Deployed as forward pickets or flank guards, these soldiers established what became known, both by Union and Confederate forces, as zones of death. A small group of Henry riflemen, numbering perhaps a dozen, could lay down a volume of fire equivalent to an entire company of standard infantry. Confederate reports, often captured or relayed by prisoners, spoke of these encounters with a mixture of awe and terror. Soldiers reported facing an unceasing torrent of bullets, an almost supernatural rate of fire that shattered their formations and morale. One particularly vivid account described weapons that could be loaded on Sunday and fired all week, a stark hyperbole that encapsulated the psychological shock. For soldiers accustomed to the distinct, deliberate rhythm of muzzle-loader fire, a shot followed by a noticeable lull, the continuous crack, crack, crack of the Henry was disorienting and utterly demoralizing. Attacking forces found it impossible to maintain cohesion, let alone press an advantage, when confronted with such relentless firepower. The sheer volume of projectiles created an invisible barrier, a lethal space where no living man could long endure. The Cumberland River engagements were not merely victories. They were a chilling testament to a new, terrifying reality of warfare. The accumulating evidence of the repeating rifle's effectiveness reached a dramatic crescendo at the Battle of Allatoona Pass in October 1864. While the Henry rifle was relatively scarce, its technological cousin, the Spencer repeating rifle, a 7-shot weapon with its tubular magazine in the buttstock, was marginally more widespread and had seen greater, though still limited, government adoption. At Allatoona Pass, a crucial Union supply depot in Georgia, a garrison of approximately 1,944 Union troops, many of whom were armed with Spencer repeaters, found themselves defending against a vastly superior Confederate force of over 6,000 under Major General Samuel G. French. The ensuing battle was a desperate, bloody affair, characterized by repeated Confederate charges against entrenched Union positions. However, the Union defenders, leveraging the rapid-fire capability of their Spencer rifles, were able to inflict staggering casualties. The Confederates, expecting a conventional fight against muzzle-loaders, were repeatedly decimated by the concentrated continuous fire. The Spencers, though holding fewer rounds than the Henry, delivered a sustained rate of fire that overwhelmed the attackers. The battle raged for hours, but the numerical superiority of the Confederates was nullified by the technological advantage of the Union defenders. By day's end, the Confederates had suffered nearly 700 casualties, including many officers, while the Union garrison sustained just over 100 losses. Allatoona Pass became an undeniable, visceral demonstration of how repeating firearms could fundamentally alter the tactical equation. A smaller, well-armed force could hold off a much larger enemy, not merely through superior position, but through superior firepower. The pattern was clear and irrefutable. Wherever repeating rifles appeared in sufficient concentration, the traditional deadly mathematics of warfare, where numerical superiority almost inevitably led to victory, were dramatically rewritten. The Spencer, like the Henry, was sounding a death knell for centuries of established military doctrine. This evidence, accumulating on battlefields from the skirmishes of Tennessee to the desperate defense of Allatoona Pass, screamed a message that the Union High Command, particularly in Washington, D.C., was finding increasingly difficult to ignore or to accept. The field was speaking, but would anyone truly listen? The compelling, if brutal evidence from battlefields like Allatoona Pass, where repeating rifles had decisively turned the tide against numerically superior forces, did not universally resonate as a clarion call for modernization. Far from the din of musketry, the acrid scent of black powder, and the screams of the wounded, in the austere, gas-lit offices of the United States Ordnance Department in Washington, D.C., such reports were viewed not with excitement, but with a growing, profound alarm. Here, within the solemn confines of bureaucratic power, the guardian of the old order, General James Wolfe Ripley, held sway. At 68 years old when the Civil War began in 1861, Ripley was a figure carved from the very granite of military tradition. His distinguished service record stretched back to the War of 1812, having also served through the Mexican-American War. His worldview was meticulously forged in an era of linear tactics, precise formations, and the measured, deliberate rhythm of muzzle-loading firearms. The very notion of rapid-fire, individually wielded weapons was antithetical to the principles upon which he had built his career and his understanding of warfare. He was not merely resistant to change, He was, in effect, the principal antagonist to this technological innovation, seeing in the repeating rifle not salvation for the Union, but a fundamental threat to the very structure, discipline, and logistical integrity of the Army he had served for over 5 decades. Ripley's office reflected his own utilitarian and unadorned approach to military matters. Sparsely furnished with heavy dark oak, its shelves groaned under the weight of meticulously organized ordnance manuals, procurement ledgers, and inventory reports, rather than grand maps of future campaigns. The atmosphere was one of solemn duty and unyielding practicality. He viewed the vast Union Army as an intricate, if sometimes unwieldy, machine, and efficiency in supply was, in his unwavering conviction, its absolute lifeblood. The idea of mass equipping Union forces with repeating rifles triggered immediate, deeply rooted anxieties concerning ammunition consumption, a fear that to him was grounded in undeniable arithmetic, not mere conservatism. He would often illustrate his point with stark, almost brutal, mathematical comparisons that left little room for debate in his mind. A soldier armed with a standard Springfield Model 1861, in a typical combat scenario, could manage to fire an average of 3 to 4 rounds per minute. Over the course of a sustained engagement, perhaps lasting hours, this meant an individual soldier might expend approximately 40 to 60 cartridges. This consumption rate, while substantial, was predictable and, crucially, manageable within the existing logistical framework of the Union Army. Now, consider a soldier armed with a Henry rifle. That man, firing 15 times faster than his muzzle-loading counterpart, could potentially exhaust his entire complement of 16 rounds in under 12 seconds. A full personal allowance of, say, 100 rounds, carefully packed into his cartridge box for battle, could be expended in a mere matter of minutes of intense combat, rather than hours. The implication of this difference was staggering. If even a significant fraction of the Army were to adopt such weapons, the demand for ammunition would not merely double or triple. It would, by Ripley's calculation, multiply by a factor of 10, 15, or even more. The Union's burgeoning but already strained supply chain was operating at its absolute limits. Millions upon millions of cartridges for Springfields, Enfields, and other standard firearms had to be manufactured in northern factories, carefully packaged, and then transported across thousands of miles of often hostile territory. This involved an immense, intricate logistical ballet. Vast networks of railroads, scores of steamboats navigating treacherous rivers, and slow-moving, vulnerable wagon trains traversing muddy roads, all susceptible to Confederate raids, mechanical failures, and the capricious vagaries of weather and terrain. To introduce a weapon that promised an exponential increase in ammunition expenditure was, in Ripley's sober and unequivocal assessment, not merely challenging or difficult, but logistically ruinous. He envisioned a catastrophic scenario: quartermasters drowning in requisitions they could not possibly fulfill, frontline units running completely dry in the middle of critical engagements, facing a numerically equal or even superior enemy with empty weapons, and the entire Union war effort grinding to a humiliating halt for want of bullets. Beyond the sheer volume, Ripley argued vehemently that arming soldiers with such high-cadence weapons would inevitably lead to indiscipline and egregious waste. His argument was deeply rooted in centuries of military doctrine, which emphasized controlled, aimed fire and the strict conservation of precious ammunition. Soldiers, he believed, if empowered with an almost limitless capacity to fire, would succumb to the temptation of indiscriminate shooting. They would, in his words, throw away valuable ammunition on improbable or non-critical targets, engaging in a costly spray-and-pray approach rather than waiting for the precise, measured shot that traditional military training and battlefield experience demanded. The disciplined volley fire, the coordinated discharge of hundreds of muskets upon command, which was the cornerstone of infantry tactics and a symbol of unit cohesion, would be abandoned in favor of individual uncontrolled barrages. This was not just a matter of economic prudence. It was a profound concern about the very psychological makeup and tactical effectiveness of the fighting force. A soldier constantly resupplied with copious ammunition, Ripley feared, would never learn the crucial lesson of conservation, a lesson often taught through the harsh, unforgettable reality of an empty cartridge box in the face of an advancing enemy. Furthermore, there was the complex and immediate issue of standardization. The Henry rifle utilized a unique 44 caliber rimfire cartridge, an entirely different beast from the 58 caliber mini-A ball of the Springfield, or the various calibers of Spencer, Enfield, and other firearms already in scattered use. Introducing yet another, completely incompatible ammunition type into an already stretched and complex supply chain would, in Ripley's view, create nothing short of a logistical nightmare. Quartermasters, already overburdened, would have to meticulously manage, categorize, and distribute multiple distinct calibers, significantly increasing the risk of misdistribution, critical shortages of specific types in crucial locations, and overall chaos across the entire network. Wagons would need to carry diverse loads, depots would require specialized storage protocols, and the entire system would become infinitely more complex, fragile, and prone to catastrophic failure. In Ripley's uncompromising view, uniformity was absolutely paramount for the efficient functioning of a mass army, and the repeating rifle threatened to shatter that uniformity into a million unmanageable pieces. Ripley's perspective, therefore, was not that of a Luddite blindly resisting progress for its own sake. Rather, he was a pragmatic, experienced officer steeped in the immutable realities of provisioning and managing armies that numbered in the hundreds of thousands. He understood that a theoretical tactical advantage gained by a few hundred men, however impressive their individual firepower, could be utterly negated by a logistical collapse affecting hundreds of thousands across an entire theater of war. He saw the grim, unyielding calculus of supplying a massive, geographically dispersed fighting force. And in that calculus, the repeating rifle, with its voracious, seemingly insatiable appetite for ammunition, represented an insurmountable, existential problem. To him, the revolutionary weapon was not a key to swift victory, but a catastrophic recipe for logistical disaster and organizational breakdown. The enthusiastic reports from the field, detailing overwhelming firepower and decisive local victories, were merely isolated instances of tactical success that, if extrapolated to the entire army, would, in his estimation, break the back of the Union war machine, not the Confederacy's. He was a man firmly entrenched in the cold calculations and practical limitations of armies built en masse, where individual initiative was deemed less important than collective efficiency, and where the smooth, uninterrupted flow of supplies was considered as critically vital as the courage of the soldiers on the front lines. General James Wolfe Ripley's opposition to the repeating rifle, while initially articulated through the lens of cold, calculated logistics and the dire warnings of ammunition depletion, possessed roots that extended far deeper into the very bedrock of military philosophy and institutional power. From his vantage point within the hallowed, often stifling halls of the Ordnance Department, Ripley perceived not merely a logistical challenge, but an existential threat to an established order that had governed armies for centuries. His desk, often laden with requisitions for millions of standard cartridges, offered him a panoramic view of the Union Army, not as an assemblage of individual heroes, but as a vast, complex mechanism dependent on synchronized parts and unwavering obedience. The Union Army's command structure, like most major armies of the mid-19th century, was inextricably linked to military doctrines that had been refined over centuries of European warfare. These doctrines, honed through conflicts from the Napoleonic Wars to earlier dynastic struggles, emphasized the absolute primacy of massed formations, rigid discipline, and the coordinated volley fire of hundreds, if not thousands, of men acting as a single, overwhelming unit. In this system, the individual soldier was, by design, an essentially fungible unit. His effectiveness was measured not by personal initiative or unique prowess, but by his unwavering obedience to orders, his ability to maintain formation under fire, and his contribution to the collective, devastating impact of a synchronized barrage. Officers derived their authority and status from their capacity to command and maneuver these vast formations, orchestrating movements and fire disciplines that could decide the fate of battles. The repeating rifle, in Ripley's view, shattered this centuries-old paradigm. It was not just a piece of hardware, it was an ideological insurgency, The weapon empowered the individual soldier with a heretofore unprecedented volume of fire, granting him an autonomy that was deeply incompatible with the hierarchical, top-down model of command. A soldier armed with a Henry rifle, capable of delivering 15 or 16 shots in mere seconds, possessed enough individual firepower to dramatically alter the outcome of small engagements, or to hold critical ground without the immediate, direct support or coordinated action of an entire company. Such a soldier could operate effectively as an independent sharpshooter or a self-sufficient defender, performing tasks that traditionally required the collective effort and coordinated action of an entire platoon or even a company. This individual autonomy was precisely what the military hierarchy, as personified by General Ripley, feared most. The apprehension was not that such empowered soldiers would be less effective in combat. Rather, it was the chilling realization that they might become too effective, but in ways that bypassed and thereby undermined the traditional chain of command. Ripley envisioned a breakdown of discipline. Soldiers, emboldened by their personal firepower, might abandon their formations, act on their own initiative without awaiting commands, or disregard orders to hold fire in favor of engaging targets independently. In internal memorandums and correspondence, a distinct pattern of this concern emerged. In December 1863, General Ripley articulated this fear directly to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, writing, "An overabundance of firepower in the hands of individual soldiers inevitably leads to a breakdown of discipline and disobedience of orders. Soldiers overly confident in their personal arms are less likely to maintain formation or await commands." Another, later redacting the officer's name for discretion, was even more blunt. "The repeating rifle makes every soldier his own platoon commander. This is incompatible with good military order." These statements revealed a profound, almost primal discomfort with the shifting locus of power. Officers whose status, authority, and indeed, their entire professional identity depended on commanding large formations in complex coordinated maneuvers saw their value diminished in a battlefield where individual soldiers, armed with superior weapons, could accomplish tasks that once demanded entire companies. The fear was not merely that soldiers would waste ammunition. It was that they might develop an acute sense of self-reliance and independent capability that was fundamentally incompatible with the rigid hierarchy and collective identity essential to a mass army. The weapon threatened to transform the army from a unified, controllable instrument into a collection of semi-autonomous agents, a concept anathema to the institutional mind. The profound power of this institutional conservatism was perhaps best illustrated by an extraordinary and deeply ironic event that transpired in August 1863. At the height of the war, amidst mounting casualty lists and the desperate search for any advantage, the very highest authority in the land, President Abraham Lincoln, personally intervened. Always a man of practical curiosity and a keen appreciation for technology, Lincoln arranged for a demonstration of the Henry rifle on the verdant grounds behind the White House. Benjamin Tyler, Henry himself, or a representative from the New Haven Arms Company, was likely present, eager to showcase their revolutionary design. Lincoln, then 54 years old, famously engaged with new inventions and took a direct hands-on approach. He personally tested the Henry rifle, experiencing firsthand its rapid-fire capabilities and its impressive accuracy. The president, a man whose judgment was rarely clouded by prejudice, was visibly impressed. He reportedly fired the rifle himself, marveling at its speed and ease of operation compared to the cumbersome muzzle loaders. His reaction was unequivocally positive, recognizing the immense potential for such a weapon to provide a decisive edge to Union troops and potentially shorten the bloody conflict. Yet, even the commander-in-chief's personal endorsement and palpable enthusiasm proved insufficient to overcome the entrenched resistance of the Ordnance Department. General Ripley, shielded by the bureaucratic bulwark he had so meticulously constructed, remained intransigent. His formal objections, framed always in the dispassionate language of logistics and military doctrine, were considered unassailable. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a powerful political figure, but one who often deferred to the expertise of his military commanders on technical matters, implicitly backed Ripley's assessments. Stanton received Ripley's reports on the inadequacy for standard military service and excessive ammunition consumption without challenging their underlying assumptions. The president, though he held ultimate authority, could not simply override the intricate web of bureaucracy and established military thinking without risking a larger rupture within his war cabinet and the Army's leadership. Thus, the Henry rifle, a weapon capable of altering the course of the war and saving countless lives, remained largely sidelined. This episode stands as a stark testament to the profound power of institutional conservatism over tactical logic, demonstrating how deeply ingrained beliefs and the fear of disrupting established hierarchies could, even in the crucible of civil war, prevail over the most compelling evidence of technological superiority and even the direct wishes of the president himself. The weapon was dangerous, not merely to the enemy, but to the very order of the army that was meant to wield it. The undeniable, brutal efficacy of repeating rifles, so vividly demonstrated at Allatoona Pass, found its most devastating and conclusive expression a month later, in the twilight hours of November 30, 1864, at the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee. This engagement served as a stark, bloody testament to both the raw courage of Confederate troops and the horrific cost of confronting advanced firepower with outdated tactics. General John Bell Hood, a commander known for his aggressive, often reckless frontal assaults, hurled his Army of Tennessee in 13 desperate charges against entrenched Union positions south of Nashville. Many of these Union regiments, particularly those holding the crucial center of the line, were armed with Spencer repeaters, the reliable 7-shot sibling of the Henry. As the Confederate ranks, bayonets fixed, surged forward across 2 miles of open ground, their battle flags snapping in the cold autumn wind, they were met not by the staggered, intermittent fire of muzzleloaders, but by an unbroken, concentrated storm of lead. The Spencer-equipped Union lines unleashed a torrent of projectiles that tore through the massed Confederate formations with unimaginable ferocity. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the sustained crackle of rapid fire, a sound that quickly overshadowed the shouts of officers and the rebel yell. The psychological effect on the advancing Confederates was immediate and devastating. Soldiers who had bravely faced hundreds of battles found themselves confronting an enemy whose rate of fire seemed supernatural, defying all prior experience. Men fell by the hundreds, then by the thousands, their bodies piling up in front of the Union earthworks. Some Confederate units, particularly the elite divisions of Cleburne and Brown, suffered catastrophic losses, with casualty rates soaring to over 70% in certain brigades. The ground before the Union lines became a ghastly testament to the Spencers' efficiency, a field choked with dead and wounded, an almost impassable barrier of human carnage. General Hood, surveying the remnants of his shattered army, would later articulate the profound tactical and psychological impact of these weapons. In his post-battle reports and memoirs, he wrote of the incessant fire of those devilish weapons that had broken the backbone of my best brigades. The term devilish was not merely a hyperbolic expression of frustration, it was an admission of encountering a force that defied conventional understanding, a weapon that tore apart not just formations, but the very spirit of his men. The Battle of Franklin was an unvarnished, bloody vindication of the repeating rifle's decisive power. Yet, even with such irrefutable evidence pouring in from every theater of war, the High Command in Washington, D.C., particularly the Ordnance Department, remained steadfastly committed to its conservative stance. General Ripley, unmoved by the staggering casualty figures inflicted by Spencer or Henry rifles, continued to deny requisitions for large-scale procurement. His official pronouncements routinely cited inadequacy for standard military service and the ever-present concern of excessive ammunition consumption. However, the true nature of this deep-seated resistance, the obscure reason that superseded tactical advantage and even presidential interest, became chillingly clear in internal memorandums and correspondence that survived in the National Archives. These documents reveal that Ripley's objections were not solely, or even primarily, logistical. They were rooted in a profound fear of organizational decay and a challenge to the very essence of military authority. In a candid letter to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton in December 1863, Ripley laid bare his most profound apprehension. An overabundance of firepower in the hands of individual soldiers leads inevitably to a breakdown of discipline and disobedience of orders. Soldiers overly confident in their personal arms are less likely to maintain formation or await commands. This was not merely a concern about wasted bullets, it was a fear that the repeating rifle would fundamentally erode the hierarchical structure upon which the Union Army was built. Ripley, steeped in the martial traditions of Europe, understood command as a top-down, absolute authority. The Army functioned as a coherent whole through strict adherence to orders and disciplined, coordinated action. The individual soldier was a cog in a larger machine, his personal initiative deliberately curtailed for the sake of collective efficacy. The repeating rifle threatened to invert this power dynamic. With a Henry rifle, a common private possessed the firepower to act almost as a platoon commander unto himself. He could suppress enemy advances, hold a position, or execute an ambush with a level of autonomy that traditionally required dozens of men operating under direct officer supervision. This unprecedented individual empowerment, Ripley theorized, would foster a dangerous sense of self-reliance, encouraging soldiers to disregard commands, break formation, and engage the enemy on their own terms. It was a vision of battlefield chaos, not order, where the control of officers over their men would dissolve. Another internal memorandum, the author's name later redacted, was even more succinct and pointed. The repeating rifle makes every soldier his own platoon commander. This is incompatible with good military order. This stark statement illuminated the core of the institutional fear. The weapon was being suppressed not because it was ineffective, but precisely because it was too effective in ways that fundamentally threatened the established hierarchy. The argument was not about military success, but about the preservation of military control. Officers, whose authority derived from managing large formations and orchestrating complex maneuvers, saw their relevance diminished in a world where individual soldiers with superior weapons could achieve similar tactical outcomes. The fear was that the self-reliant soldier, empowered by a weapon that made him singularly formidable, would become ungovernable. When the long, brutal conflict finally concluded in April 1865, the Union had achieved victory, but not through a radical embrace of new technology. By then, only approximately 10,000 repeating rifles of all types, Henry, Spencer, and others, had seen service in the Union forces. This was an astonishingly minuscule fraction, less than 1%, of the more than 3 million soldiers who had served in the Union Army throughout the war. The opportunity to shorten the conflict, to save countless lives by overwhelming the enemy with superior firepower, had been largely foregone, sacrificed on the altar of tradition and institutional fear. The Henry rifle, therefore, would not achieve its iconic status in the grand, sweeping battles of the Civil War. Instead, its true legacy would bloom in the decades following the conflict. The Winchester Repeating Arms Company, successor to the New Haven Arms, continued to refine and produce descendants of Benjamin Tyler Henry's revolutionary design. These rifles, embodying the spirit of individual self-reliance and rapid-fire capability, became synonymous with the conquest of the American West. There, on the vast, unforgiving frontier, where individual men and small groups faced immense dangers without the support of massed military formations, the Winchester repeater became the gun that won the West, an indispensable tool for survival, exploration, and expansion. The episode of the Henry rifle in the Civil War offers a profound, enduring lesson in the complex interplay between technological innovation and institutional conservatism. The weapon that could have dramatically shortened the war and saved thousands of lives was kept out of the hands of the majority of Union soldiers, not due to its limitations, but due to its profound, transformative potential. The military establishment, confronted with a technology that threatened to render obsolete centuries of tactical doctrine, rigid hierarchies, and deeply ingrained notions of command and control, ultimately chose to preserve its existing structure of power rather than wholeheartedly embrace a revolutionary advantage. Historians would later point to this episode as a classic example of how institutional inertia and the fear of change can triumph over tactical logic, how the imperative of victory can be superseded by the desire to maintain the status quo. The Henry rifle, largely silenced by the very officers whose troops it was designed to protect, remains a potent reminder that in war, as in all human endeavors, the most dangerous weapon is not always the one that inflicts the most casualties, but the one that fundamentally threatens to alter who holds power and how it is wielded. The conflict ultimately drew to a close not with a radical embrace of the future, but through the grinding attrition of a war largely fought with the methods of the past. The Henry rifle, a harbinger of modern warfare, faded from the immediate battlefields of the Civil War, its profound potential muted by the very institutional structure it might have served. Its true impact, however, would resonate across a different frontier, evolving into the iconic Winchester, shaping a new era in the American West, far from the rigid hierarchies of the Union Army. The truth of its suppression, revealed in the quiet desperation of internal memoranda, underscored a conflict far removed from the front lines, a battle for control within the military's very soul. This saga of a forbidden weapon stands as a stark reminder. It speaks to the uncomfortable truth that innovation, particularly when it empowers the individual, often encounters its greatest resistance not from external foes, but from the internal guardians of tradition and established power. It is a testament to the heavy cost exacted when the preservation of hierarchy outweighs the imperative of victory, potentially prolonging suffering and costing lives in the name of an old order. The lives that might have been saved, the battles that might have been shortened, became, in a tragic sense, silent casualties of this unseen war within the war. Reflecting on General Ripley's steadfast refusal, do you believe his concerns about discipline and logistics, though ultimately detrimental, were understandable within the context of 19th century military thinking, or simply a profound failure of vision? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If the unseen battles of innovation and the hidden costs of conservatism intrigue you, explore our previous deep dive into another overlooked technological marvel of the era. You can find it linked here. For more untold stories and forgotten histories that shape our understanding of the past, ensure you subscribe to Hidden Files and press the like button to support our work.